fights. And I wondered, given the emergence of this, what's your outlook? How are you thinking about this? What's your role going to be? How are you going to sort of approach these companies coming out of other regions?
Do you want to direct it at anyone or just throw it out there?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, we really do try to pause, and as we're thinking about potential acquisitions, really focus on what is being developed around the world and looking across the globe for potential opportunities. It is a more global landscape than ever before, and certainly we're interacting more often and looking at things in China, in Korea, in some of the other developing countries, as well as other parts of the developed world. And I think that's true for a lot of acquirers, number one. Number two, as you'll see over the next 5 to 10 years, the Chinese software industry will begin to look, and they already have to some degree, outward to acquire more talent. So they will be another competitor that I will have to think about when I am approaching a company in Western Europe to buy them. You mentioned something I think is really interesting, which is actually the regulatory framework around the world. China certainly has flexed its muscles in terms of laying down a framework and a law that requires, in a non-suspensive way, you to file for many acquisitions which you might not think of. India this summer is enacting a very similar, I believe, type law. Brazil is moving in that direction. So you definitely have more to think about, and it would be a good example. LinkedIn, where does LinkedIn reside? And where do you care about it from a regulatory perspective? Is it where the user is? Is it where the home office is? Was it where the server that's actually storing the data is? So those are interesting questions that get tied up, just to use you as an example. They get tied up. We're not buying them. Those are all interesting questions that bring in a regulatory context that is more and more relevant now than ever before.
I'll just add one small footnote to that, which is we don't think about the regulatory stuff much right now. Our acquisitions are typically small, but we do see a lot of really interesting companies everywhere in the world, and it's actually makes our job quite hard to keep track of everything around the world. And I think over the years that I've done corp dev and M&A, that has just become more and more complex, and at the same time it's necessary. I think we've all either have acquired or will definitely acquire somebody not from US very soon.
A lot of you guys actually talked about the fact that frankly every company here has a platform, an API, or a partner program which us as startups can participate in. And some of you talked about that it's actually kind of a rich channel for you to find out about interesting companies. Do you ever think that, I've heard stories at least, that in some cases the potential acquirer becomes comfortable in terms of having you as a platform partner, and it actually makes an acquisition less interesting from the perspective of, whether it's App Exchange that you're already participating in the revenue relationship or whatnot. Do you think that's ever the case?
I don't actually. So, I mean, if just to give you an example, if you're on the App Exchange and you're doing, incredible things and you're making our customers very happy and, we like the team, it's absolutely interesting to Salesforce. I have actually never heard the question. It's an interesting perspective, but it's one of those things that, we believe in having an open network, as many, partners in the ecosystem as possible. And, the more of that you have, sort of, the more success you have for your customers. Of course, there's an opportunity to look at that as an acquisition, lens in many cases. So I actually don't view it that way. And in fact, we value our partners a lot. And I would say in many cases, I would want to know, are you an App Exchange partner, just as an example? I would ask that question in, a demo if I didn't know. Right? And so it's actually important to me personally as I go through the evaluation process.
Yeah, totally echo that. I would also add that it's almost impossible for a third party to be as big as a product offering as it, versus being owned by that company that provides that platform. And so I'll give you an example. So CardMunch was the last acquisition we did. They used our APIs to, they scan business cards with iPhones. We really liked them. We liked the concept. We felt like there's a really interesting use case here. And if we left them alone, they would certainly grow. But if we bought them and brought them in-house, they could leverage a lot of the different departments that we have. They could be built into our roadmaps. They could be offered to our members for free, which is what we did. And so there's a lot of things that you couldn't do as a third party. And so as the company that provides that platform, we look at it and we say, if we own this, what can we do with it? And I'm almost certain every time, if it's a really good fit and if it takes off by itself, it will be even better as an acquired company.
Yeah, I'd only add, in the Microsoft Games Studio context, to draw an analogy, we have a lot of first-party titles. We also have a lot of third-party games. We want a vibrant ecosystem around whatever platform we have. And so you may think it's odd, but having that vibrant ecosystem actually supports the value of the platform. So we absolutely want to have that going on at the same time. As there has been mentioned, there are opportunities for a variety of reasons. Synergy is one good one, why we'd want to bring it in-house.
Can I twist that question just a little bit? If a startup has a partnership with another entity, does that preclude an acquisition? If a startup has a partnership with Google, is Microsoft going to shy away from?
Let me answer. You could answer it for me. No, the simple answer is no. Just like I mentioned before, just because you have open source components in some of your software doesn't mean or you're not written on .NET doesn't mean I don't want to buy you. So
Right.
that's all mythical.
I would agree.
Hi, good evening. ACE panel. I go to a lot of conferences. It's a very good panel. Now, I'm going to ask you a tough question, but I'm going to make it easy for you. The tough question is, I want you guys, because you're a lot of talent, a lot of experience, to be quarterbacks, commentators, and talk to us about a play that somebody else did. I won't put you on the spot. But it's hard to criticize yourself or competitors who are right here, but let's pick on somebody who's not in the room. So let's pick on Twitter. They just made a very interesting series of moves and jabs and jousts, and then acquisition offer, we think. A lot of this is rumor, but some of it seems to be actual, for TweetDeck. And I'm curious if you could just pick it apart as like professors and say, what was going on there? There was Axel trying to invest, and venture cap was trying to do roll-up, and them trying to jump in. Dissect it for us, if you would.
I'll beg off right away. I just don't know enough about it to actually give you anything at all.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the cold call question in business school, where you might have to pass and come back the next day. I'm not sure I know enough about that to comment.
I don't think you're going to get an answer from any of us. I'll tell you that. But I will say this: as people who do corp dev, we read a lot about what other people do, and certainly a lot of journalists and others sort of weigh in on what they think, and then they do the same thing to what we do, and almost always they're wrong. And so there's so many different variables that people outside the deal just don't know about. And they only weigh in on what they see, and they're very interesting reads and entertaining for sure. But I almost certainly don't really believe everything that I read.
I'll try, but you're probably not going to get an answer as well. But just I think it was a good compliment and a layup up to it. The only thing I would say is I think Twitter has a really exciting business model, and they have an ecosystem, and so as you go through that, I view it as an opportunity to sort of go through the process and see, okay, is there something and sort of different ways to look at whether it's TweetDeck or other things like that that they've looked at to sort of change it up and invent something sort of that's different than maybe what that company would have done otherwise. Doesn't really directly answer your question, but that's how I view it. I mean, I don't know enough about their acquisition strategy to really make a sort of valuable comment.
We talked about how much weight you put on acquisitions being somewhat of an art versus science, or human capital versus hard assets in your evaluation criteria. What sort of weight do you put on where a company is in their funding cycle? Are you somewhat series agnostic? Do you have certain hurdles that you'd like to see, or acquire companies at a certain stage? How do you view that component of it?
I'll go first. It's probably easiest for LinkedIn because we haven't done the bigger deals. For us, if we're looking at a company that's mostly based on the people and some products, and we really value the people, we generally have a bias towards paying the people we're going to bring on board more than paying the investors. So that naturally means an earlier stage company. Having said that, it's if a company has built something really strong and they have a very good team, they have a very big value proposition for us, it doesn't really matter what stage they're in. And so I'm not sure it totally matters one way or another, but there's a preference to pay the employees more than the investors.
Agree with that. I think as well, at least I've worked on deals where, companies have had multiple rounds of funding or have had no funding. Depending on the deal, sometimes it's easier to work with a CEO who has no funding because they know exactly what they want and they know how to sort of negotiate through the process. At the same time, it could be harder because sometimes the investor, helps you through the process in many ways, probably optimizes your valuation depending on who your investor is. But I don't think there's a target or a preference. I think it's, again, more about the company and more about the talent. I can't emphasize the talent part of it enough. And that's...
Yep, we're agnostic.
I think the same, and I think really, as opposed to life cycle, it really is about the talent for a startup. And the talent was kind of the primary reason we ended up buying Mint.com a couple of years ago, and we're just very impressed with that team, Aaron Patzer, and that was really kind of the predominant criteria versus kind of where they were in funding or life cycle.
You don't ever want to swoop in before that next round, like with Rick's company. He was at that raise more money, buy us now for cheap, buy us later for a lot more. You don't ever think about that. It's not an issue.
Well, value is in the eye of the beholder in some respects, but also you hope when you say buy them for a lot more later, there's more value, right?
Sure.
And so you can't disassociate the two.
Yeah, and it's all about timing, right? So, I mean, I think your situation, you leveraged it well. You had, an investor and an acquirer at the same time, and that's good. Some people have that opportunity. Some people don't. Some people are in a different situation, whether they're running out of funding and, maybe they haven't been able to raise a round. That becomes a little bit easier for an acquirer to deal with. But it really depends on the company and the market. And, I guess if you're in the sort of space of social buying, that may be a little easier than if you're in some other types of spaces. So,
Great.
My question's about structuring a buyout with an earnout also involved. And for most people in this audience, I don't know how many people are that familiar with it, but there's a lot that has to go into the negotiation to get alignment on your earnout terms. Because of all that negotiation added to a transaction, is that really something that they should be considering? Or should you get your deal and that's your deal and don't try and get any more on an earnout? Because it's too hard to get you all aligned.
I would echo what Robbie said earlier. We don't do earnouts. I'd rather figure out what the deal is and either walk away or not, rather than go through not only the time, but then the post-deal time that Robbie referenced before. So I would echo 1,000 times what he said.
Yeah, I'll add a little more to that, though. The acquirers are always going to want to pay less than what you want, and the earnout is typically the first thing that people say, hey, let's just do an earnout so we can show you we can earn that value. And then you get into, okay, how long